The Roman salute was a real Roman gesture. The raised right arm, straight, rigid, commanding, is widely known as the Roman salute. Most people believe it comes directly from ancient Rome. It doesn't. There is no evidence that Romans ever used such a salute. No Roman texts describe it. No statues or reliefs show it as a formal greeting. No military manuals mention it. The gesture actually comes from 18th and 19th century art, especially paintings that tried to symbolize loyalty and sacrifice in ancient Rome. Later, theater and early films adopted it because it looked dramatic and authoritative. In the 1920s, Mussolini deliberately revived this fictional gesture to fake a connection to the Roman Empire. It was then copied by a certain regime led by a funny mustache man from Austria, turning it into a compulsory political symbol. What looks ancient is in fact modern propaganda pretending to be history. 2. Samurai only used katanas. Popular culture shows samurai as elegant sword-fighting duelists facing each other in dramatic one-on-one battles, but this image is largely a modern invention. For most of Japanese history, samurai were not swordsmen first, they were archers and spearmen. Early samurai warfare revolved around the yumi, the longbow, which was the primary weapon of the warrior class for centuries. Battles were fought at distance, with volleys of arrows and coordinated formations, not cinematic duels. Later, pole arms like the yari spear and the naginata became dominant on the battlefield because they were more effective in mass combat. The katana rose to prominence much later, especially during long periods of peace when large-scale warfare declined. Over time, the sword evolved from a backup weapon into a powerful symbol of honor, discipline, and social status. The katana is iconic, but for most of samurai history, it was not their main weapon of war. 3. The Mongols were only destructive barbarians. The Mongols are often remembered as nothing more than ruthless conquerors who burned cities and slaughtered populations. And it's true, their conquests were violent and devastating, but that is only part of the story. Once the fighting ended, the Mongols focused on control, stability, and connection. They created the largest continuous empire in history and unified vast regions under a single legal system known as the Yasa. Trade routes were protected, merchants were granted safe passage, and banditry was severely punished. This security allowed the Silk Road to flourish like never before, moving goods, ideas, technologies, and even knowledge across continents. The Mongols practiced religious tolerance, allowing Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and local beliefs to coexist within their empire. They also promoted engineers, scholars, and administrators based on merit, not ethnicity. History remembers the destruction, but often forgets the global system the Mongols built afterward, one that reshaped Eurasia forever. 4. The Library of Alexandria was destroyed in a single fire. The image is unforgettable. One catastrophic blaze, shelves of scrolls turning to ash, and humanity's knowledge lost in a single night. But that story is a myth. The Library of Alexandria did not vanish all at once. There is no clear evidence of a single fire destroying it entirely. Instead, the library declined slowly over centuries. It suffered damage during wars, including conflicts involving Julius Caesar. Later, political instability weakened the institutions that supported it. Funding dried up, scholars left, collections were no longer copied or maintained. Even more important, Alexandria wasn't just one building. It was a network of libraries, schools, and scholars spread across the city. As priorities changed and empires fell, knowledge stopped being preserved. Scrolls decayed, texts were lost through neglect rather than flames. So humanity's greatest library wasn't erased in one dramatic moment. It faded, quietly, gradually, and almost invisibly. Not with a bang, but with centuries of silence. Number 5. Cleopatra was Egyptian. Cleopatra is often remembered as the ultimate Egyptian queen, wrapped in gold, ruling from the Nile, speaking to her people in their own tongue. And in many ways, she was Egyptian, but ethnically, Cleopatra was Greek. She belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Macedonian Greeks who took control of Egypt after Alexander the Great's conquest in 332 BCE. For nearly 3 centuries, the Ptolemies ruled Egypt while remaining culturally Greek, often marrying within their own family to preserve their lineage. Cleopatra was different. She learned the Egyptian language, something most of her ancestors never bothered to do. She adopted Egyptian religious traditions and presented herself as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. To her subjects, she did not rule over Egypt, she ruled as Egypt. Her authority wasn't rooted in ancestry. It came from political intelligence, cultural adaptation, and deliberate image-making. Cleopatra's true power lay not in where she came from, but in how convincingly she became Egypt itself. 6. Julius Caesar was born via Caesarean section. It sounds obvious. Caesar, Caesarean. The name alone feels like proof, but the story is wrong. In ancient Rome, Caesarean sections were not a miracle birth method. They were a last resort, performed only when the mother was already dead or dying, usually to save the child for religious or legal reasons. Survival for the mother was almost impossible. And here's the key detail. Julius Caesar's mother, Aurelia, lived for decades after his birth. She was alive during his rise to power and played a major role in his political career, so the surgery could not have been how he was born. The term Caesarean most likely comes from Roman law, lex Caesarea, which required babies to be cut from deceased pregnant women before burial. Others trace it to Latin words meaning to cut. The myth endured for one simple reason: the name fit too perfectly to doubt. Sometimes history's most convincing stories survive purely because they sound right. 7. Spartan children were routinely thrown off cliffs if weak. Sparta's reputation is built on brutality, iron discipline, merciless training, and soldiers bred for war. So the story feels believable, but the evidence doesn't support it. Ancient sources claim that weak Spartan infants were thrown into a chasm called the apathetti, yet archaeology tells a different story. There are no mass graves, no remains of large numbers of infants, no physical proof of a systematic practice. Most accounts come from writers like Plutarch, who lived centuries after Sparta's peak. These later authors often exaggerated Spartan harshness to shock their readers, or to contrast Sparta with other Greek societies. That doesn't mean Sparta was gentle. It was rigid, selective, and obsessed with military readiness. Children faced harsh training, and survival was never easy. But the image of newborns routinely hurled from cliffs is likely myth, not policy. Sparta's cruelty has been amplified by storytelling until propaganda hardened into fact. 8. The pyramids were built by slaves. For generations, the pyramids have been imagined as monuments raised by endless lines of enslaved workers, men in chains driven by whips beneath the desert sun. It is a powerful image, and it is wrong. Modern archaeology tells a very different story. Near the pyramids of Giza, researchers uncovered entire workers' villages. These settlements included planned housing, bakeries, breweries, and evidence of regular meat consumption. Skeletal remains even show signs of medical treatment, broken bones that were set and healed. These were not disposable slaves. They were organized laborers. Many were Egyptian farmers who worked on the pyramids during the Nile's annual flood, when agriculture was impossible. Others were skilled specialists, stonecutters, engineers, and builders, whose work required training and precision. They were paid in food, goods, and social status. Their labor was demanding, but it was also honorable. The pyramids were not built by chains and cruelty. They were built by coordination, engineering brilliance, and collective effort, not forced suffering, but human skill on a monumental scale. 9. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." The phrase is infamous, a single sentence that seems to capture everything people hate about royal arrogance. A starving population, a queen so detached she offers dessert instead of bread. But Marie Antoinette almost certainly never said it. The quote appears in written sources decades before the French Revolution, most notably in the writings of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. There it is attributed vaguely to a great princess with no name attached, and it predates Marie Antoinette's arrival in France by years. By the time the revolution began, the line was repurposed. It was too perfect to ignore. Protesters and pamphleteers needed a symbol of elite indifference, and the young foreign queen made an easy target. The sentence spread, not because it was true, but because it was useful. It simplified complex political and economic failures into one shocking line. It turned anger into a story. "Let them eat cake" wasn't a quote. It was propaganda designed to endure long after the truth was forgotten. Number 10. People in the Middle Ages rarely bathed. Popular culture paints the Middle Ages as a time of constant filth, muddy streets, unwashed bodies, and people who simply didn't care about hygiene. But that image is misleading. Medieval people did bathe, and often more regularly than we assume. Across Europe, many towns had public bathhouses, especially between the 12th and 15th centuries. Bathing was not just about cleanliness, it was a social activity. People washed their bodies, cleaned their clothes, groomed their hair, and used soaps made from animal fats and plants. Medical texts of the time even recommended bathing for health. The real decline came later. During the early modern period, fears about disease changed attitudes. People began to believe that water opened the pores, allowing illness to enter the body. As a result, bathing fell out of favor, especially during plague outbreaks. So the stereotype of medieval filth is misplaced. It doesn't belong to the Middle Ages at all. It belongs to later centuries misunderstanding and misjudging them.